Is that good? Curtis, that was good.
Yeah, that's fine.
We have 5 or 7.
We have 5.
Are you gonna take a picture? Okay, I'll sit down so I can take a picture. Okay, okay. 3, 2, 1.
You got a 1AC ready to go?
Yep. What is this?
That's mine, sorry. Give me just 1 second.
I actually don't even have the 1AC pulled up. Or set.
Oh, it's not sent. Oh, wait.
Oh, it's because I turned my mouse up. It's not ready. Sent. Alright, I'm pretty good.
1 second. I still haven't gotten it. Oh, it
Yeah,
just
for
popped
the
up.
email, I don't have one.
I think it just popped up.
For you, maybe.
Oh, you're right.
Sorry, can I get hands from the panel? I can see a lot of people, but who else? 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect, gotcha.
I'm already on my esteemed colleagues already. I don't have a document.
You ready to go?
Yeah, we're all here. We're just waiting for documents and such.
The document, yeah, it's sent. I mean, like,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
We'll start. Sorry, y'all good? Everybody good?
We get it, I should get it.
Okay, fair enough. Momentum gathers and something shifts. A tipping point opens an unknown horizon. An electric charge builds, pulsates through and around us as we convene for deliberation. In 1957, Martin Grudson coined the term tipping points to describe white flight, the phenomenon where black families moving into a neighborhood cause white people to leave. These imperceptible molecular shifts map a tipping trajectory that continues to imagine the urban as unsafe, unruly, and unwhite, paving the way for molar responses, organized abandonment, redlining, and policing. This was never about any individual black family, but the threat that blackness itself posed to the white world. Decades later, in 2014, Time magazine released a cover featuring Laverne Cox with the title "The Transgender Tipping Point: America's Next Civil Rights Frontier." This tipping point indicated not a movement of existing bodies, but a paradigm shift in embodiment itself, indexing the improvisational modes of trans life into a noble frame, an attempt to linearize behavior to ensure the reproduction of well-behaved families of workers written into the social code. This hierarchy of mattering set the limits of a trans politics firmly within the realm of quantification, where we must count to matter a political typography that needs the bodies of black trans women and trans women of color as matter to constitute the transgender tipping point. This is why, in Time's interview with Laverne Cox, she never spoke the words "America's Next Civil Rights Frontier," but her image could nevertheless be used as a potent sign of the coming future perfect, and also of a particularly unlivable life, to confirm the legitimacy of existing hierarchies of political mattering and deny the possibilities of life otherwise. In 2019, Scientific American once again published an article about tipping points, this time to describe coral reefs facing the planetary ecological crisis. The looming future of climate tipping points augured an unknown horizon and set the conditions for encountering the familiar logics of emergency, abandonment, defense. This crisis is both a cause and effect of its own elaboration, both already here and still on the horizon, signaling a pending end to this world. But the foreclosure of the future of the tipping point signal in the collective imagination did not begin in 2019. The project of world league requires the end of uncountable worlds. The coral bleaching disproportionately occurs in former colonial territories. The retroactive effect of colonization is ecological and social demise. The mythology of tipping points is the capacity to name crisis that remains properly endowed to the human. The molarization of a constitutive of molecular violence, tipping points, cannot be named as such until the violence that comes back to haunt the world constructed by and for the human. This resolution is constructed through the same capacity to name where the crisis of our debates occur that coheres the rhetorical assemblage of our communities. Here, this problem of the human and non-human seems more relevant than ever. Wow, 23. Tipping points index both threat and vulnerability under conditions of colonial racism. Tipping point became commonplace in the 1950s as we converged away, flight in the middle, logical race and sexology. Tipping points led to construction, former order, can't be period to save emergency, what's worthless amounts of the unworthy, the translate is right, the values of inclusion was these kinds of the current estimates. Another tipping point, these interactions teach us about risk, visibility, regeneration. 13, transversity offers a way to consider the human interactions with the non-human world. Transversality is a method in forces conversation. Transversal never understand that there is more than either or form cross-pollination. Remember transversality, the attempt to explode communication across at every level. Ecological adaptation exceeds the recursive logic crisis thought. Tipping point, pollution, warming is already here, still in the sutures, logic to colonial areas. And the tipping point, American cities, what met with policing investment. The trans tipping point has become a popular target point for a new wave of social conservatism. The cultural tipping point is ostensibly different. We conceptualize globalization and ecological destruction is effective whatever races that it is whirling, emergency with uneven effects, banker economic utility, cause warming as well. It has become big business. These projects are arguing up defense against tipping point, back with familiar logic. The environmental science is pretended by racial, sexual, imaginary, the collective unconscious of different makes tipping points. 2016 coral use of sunlight, but turning purple to cool reach. This regeneration follows a different logic than emergency, innovating a different relationship between traumatic destruction capacity for renewable. We pay attention to how to be otherwise redefined adversely alongside black trans life mattering disclosure gender capacities in the face of clear death and investments in their continued utility. Hierarchies of political mattering formed by the fascist affect and metabolism cohere the climate crisis and shape our political responses from calls to militarize and lock down the southern border to demands for HRT bans to the carbon footprint of transition, shoring up an imperial home as the crisis necessary to ensure the world unbounded. The crisis of fascism bundles seemingly contradictory movements, solidarity, spheres, and context. Climate, politics of autonomy and sovereignty, the authoritarian politics of administrating sex and gender to produce and violently maintain a hierarchy of political mattering. Trump's election was not a tipping point, but a demonstration of the power of the fascist affect and metabolism as a protracted racial and gender project. As Iowa eliminates dorm floors housing black, queer, and trans students, and Trump locates gender ideology alongside DEI as un-American indoctrination, it becomes clear that there is something about these affectively laden modes of political mattering that gesture towards the unsustainability of the racial colonial order, which must be made and remade at the level of the everyday. Crime 24. Trans people broadly are imagined by the far right as a resource for fomenting white nationalist energy, trans antagonism, encompassing genderless, racialized psyche of state-powered social organization, includes everything unemployment, housing, policing, criminalization, direction of personal violence. The intended use of and scope of anti-transfer rendering trans antagonism as a form of nationalist energy and a bit of energy, draws linkages between those whose lives are rendered spendable, the historical process of metabolism periods into the authoritarian control, for example, Gaza process, exclusion, protections, conduct, neutrality, stake, for those trying to remake the world of fascist designs, attachment to white supremacy, superior social order, environmental destruction, webs of fascist, energizing national struggles over gender, trans antagonism, travels, transports, affects, new readers, race, reaction, sentiment, affect, metabolism, tracks, relations of energy, resource, mentality, ignition, combustion, gas, and expendability regimes, racialized label themselves around people's resource production, but new labor project exhaustion transforms racial capital values, also social reproduction, planetary capture, translates our caste crimes against stage, including divine order. These narratives draw emerging equal anxieties, turn resource, trans people exhaustion, metabolize grievance into authoritarian control, the white supremacy and energy dynamics, road time capacity, the conversion of life and resourcing, new life and mentality for fascist worlds, grapple with disability, climate justice, and education, as fascist underhousing, cumulative scope, necessities, or robust political imagination, defense of all life images disposable. In our trans archives, we find unexpected climate workers who do not recognize themselves or not named by others as such. Moral panic, staff energy. We need capacity building ground in our spaces within our spaces for environmental justice. The affective flows of fascist violence organized whirling at the molar level, hierarchizing bodies, ontologizing gender and race as social differentiations, a matter to enable mass violence. The fascist affective metabolism inscribes history onto bodies, rewriting the past and future, overriding our ability to articulate its outside. But modernity does not have a monopoly on thinking. We cannot separate the warming of the world from suburbanization and white flight, the nuclear family, colonization, slavery and its afterlives, eugenic protocols of abandonment, white supremacist immigration politics, and trans antagonism. Past the tipping point where existential threats to the white cis world dwell beneath the surface of the ocean, which has been rising since long before Time magazine and Scientific American's announcements of crisis. Transversality articulates submerged forms of relationalities that need not be visible to have effects. Read together, these interactions teach us about risk, visibility, and regeneration. The urban and the ocean are connected. The impending blackness of cities is inseparable from the middle passage. The imagined encroachment of black trans people threatens to overwhelm hegemonic norms. We need to think about this together. We must think it all together as we engage in original, differentially materials, practice, and study. Understanding the fascist affective metabolism of the world is a tried through crisis, gestures towards an urgent task, because we know that the state of emergency is also always a state of emergence that remakes this world through the conversion of our lives and energy. We know that it is our task to bring about a real state of emergency, a rupture in history. Thus, Gray and I affirm an alternate energy politic of transversality. Transversality is a collective project, a collectivization of our desire and attunement to a kind of intensity that cannot be quantified through the language of tipping points. Transversality tells us if at first we were approaching this project as two people, two bodies in space, or two voices in the ether, our approach is now more like entangled particles. A politics at the level of the molecular mode of analysis and praxis that dwells in the explicitly ungovernable axis between the spillage of identity and radical possibility. We learn from Coral how our kinships might form differently from the site of the riot where no program or plan determines collective liberation. On the field of desire where transmolecular revolutions occur, new modes of social production become possible. Transversality is an explosion of communication, tracing the linkages between our transmolecular revolutions that are always already forming and becoming otherwise, because there's no other world, but it can't be this one. Wild 22. Transmolecular revolution risks totalizing logic of our law or institution. Politics exists in moral power, like desire. Power takes aim at the body or psyche. Moral politics exists in the realm of quantification, where count to matter, claims of legal documents, presents the trans panic defense, arguing for trans inclusion, re-inscribed systems for articulates law and orders, as justice collective, stokes sociopolitical upheavals. I think the side of the riot, contact after riot, source Stonewall, which produces trans phenomenal liberations that follow closer to political abolition and ultimately change life. Queer kinship networks, trans aesthetics, transmolecular revolution further articulates the possibilities for black and trans life in this political crisis. The most petrifying state of things yet to come. History is remade through different repetitions. Transmolecular revolutions unfold. We'll come to know the ways that trans works together and apart. transmolecular revolution means to chart these new branches that make politics life matter. Transversality is an explosion of communication, an anoriginal poesis that proliferates new relationalities to connect across and between siloed categories of being and overturn the hierarchy of political mattering that overrepresents Western man as human. Modi 20. Trans studies and black studies share an irreducible relationship with the modern world's division of white male subjects for their others' privileges, determinacy, which reverse the mutual independency of black and trans and poetic remaking social material formations. What grammar might map how trans is blackness verse will not resemble the grammar of disciplinary knowledge in order to unsettle the colonial order of being the most unsettled biocentric order of knowledge, the logic under biological essential and economic scarcity, also disciplined bodies and modes of being into racialized gender categories, present perfect tense with black and trans studies converge. One effect is a dissolution of the divide through entangled reformations of life and language. Trans and blackness evoke an originality and original poesis. Transversality calls us to ask a different set of questions by reading the subterranean convergence as not fixed but extending in all directions, a collateral genealogy, and encounter the past that also contains an ethical confrontation with the collateral damages involved in blackness is overseen and unknown. Brust 20. Though we struggles to be formed at different levels, that one cuts up man as white hetero-capitalist bourgeois infrastructure is that which sustains the social remains imperturbable. Relations pulled together as we stumble rise against the systemic injustice towards liberation. We is always ready, but cannot be productive in simple multiplicity. It's a process and acknowledgement of ability that occurs precisely because of violence and invitation to recognize that have been act means to have been acted upon, to have been put in place. We struggle together just as we struggle with. We resist our possession from the location of that position. We as liberty concept constantly becoming, constantly failing, an invitation to burn the system that sustains these realities to the ground. We as laborious just as a fancy. We must be critical that we acting in the name of liberation remains opaque of complication, affirmation of identity, and of its fixation against the molar logic of tipping points which seek to quantify the moment of crisis. Transversality is a turn towards a set of intimacies that might overturn the map of the world and set by the fast affective metabolism. Raha and Vanderdrift 24. The responsibility comes to sensitizing towards various ways of world and requires a retuning of the intuitive, rewiring conscious intuition, immersion from one's connection to environments, connection to sociality, even if anyone can make material differences. Though trans is not the rebellion, but a different hunger for life, perhaps not yet lived, which we are rehearsing the underground, the strategy of principle militant, intransigent opposition, gentle personal relationship for comrades, one with whom one has become linked to struggle below ground. We do not abandon one another, the demands of the institution, anti-colonial rewiring, unlearning allegiance to the body, mind separation, undoing, unfeeling the body, norms of ways of body through conscious transformation, mode of relational solidarity, that claim possession, questioning the aligned desire to possess, something can be open to different worlds without claiming singular way. It makes sense. Trans world is a practice, not a way of knowing the states, but a way of making worlds. Reflection policy, action we learned for moving across worlds of care and attachments at different positions. And history, see heterogeneity, the impetus, dominate through practice, disconnect, and undoing structural separations. I mean, we have to form a single collective to every face, a generous opening form, solidarity, holds possibility of rewinding the senses, retuning our intuitions and frequencies where complicities, different flowers come into bloom.
Okay, good. What is the 1AC's theorization of black transness and transness as a category?
Okay. The 1AC has theorized blackness and transness as appositional, running alongside each other.
Why is that true?
Well, I think that this is our argument about entanglement, which is
Okay.
the collateral genealogy at the top of the 1AC.
What is that? Can you explain?
Yeah. Our argument is that we cannot separate the kind of way that the tipping point has been the way the tipping point has been mobilized demonstrates the elementary entanglement between anti-blackness, trans antagonism, cellular clonism within the fast affective metabolism of the world.
Why?
Well, I guess because there is something about these modes of political mattering that threaten the sustenance of the order that reproduces things like anti-blackness
Okay,
and
so
trans
if it's about the threat that these two categories present, my question is what happens
Well-
when the entanglement of those two threats are in contradiction with each other?
Well, I don't know. Can you give an example? Our
Yeah,
argument
sure.
is the transversality
Do you
of
want an
trans.
example?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So let's say we have somebody who's a black trans person and a white trans person.
Mhm.
What is the solution to that transmolecular revolution where the white trans person does something fucked up to the black trans person?
Well, I think that that transversality is a mode of reorienting our desires
What
towards
is
the
that?
end of the world, which means that when white trans people do fucked up things, that I guess that transversality is a way of orienting our analysis and praxis
So my thing is
that
like
can
you,
reorient those desires to the
So-
end of the world, which is to
well,
say,
it's like I don't think that answers my question because we can all agree we want the end of the world, but that does not stop white people from being fucked up to black people in the midst of the end of the world. So what does the 1AC's transmolecular revolution do to reconcile those things?
Our argument is that these fucked up things happen because white trans folks maintain an attachment to the human, the overrepresentation of Western man,
Okay.
which reproduces that violence.
But what about the 1AC
Transversality-
stop? Well, my question is like, what about the 1AC gets white trans people to stop those things?
Because it belies a way to fight our position from within it. It
But
allows-
so my issue is like, yes, there is a fight, but my question is, what about the AF stops white trans people from being anti-black and brings them to that fight?
well, I think
we think transversality is how we bring
How?
folks to that fight.
How?
Because when we understand it as all entangled, when we understand it transversely,
This is- I
we
don't-
can orient ourselves as a
I don't. Okay.
I think
That's.
that-
I have
yeah.
another question. It's fine. Transmolecular movements. What do they look like?
I think that one example we'll give is the bar dance that Gray and I put on in Iowa City with Dr. Cram, which thought about issues of climate and anti-queerness and disability justice and anti-blackness as all entangled.
So what do those movements achieve?
Well, I think that those movements, per the bottom, not the bottom of the one I see anymore, I guess it's the while evidence that articulates this kind of vibration that persists across the next thread
that's
tied.
cool. I have 10 seconds. I'll ask a question. Last question. You say we must think alongside each other. What if people in groups don't want to think alongside the movement of the 1AC?
Well, then they don't have to, because our
Okay.
argument is that the we in the 1AC refers to me and Gray, which is by the advocacy statement.
You and Gray.
it does,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Cool. I'm gonna get water really quick before Daniel sends it up.
You want me to wait for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'll make it water too if you
Yeah. It'll definitely be.
You get more than 4 off, I'm done.
So real.
What's the time difference? Y'all on the opposite. Now we're on the same coast.
Yeah, because I'm bad with geography, I just figured out yesterday that it did not change at all.
I'm dead.
Yeah, so it really didn't change at all. Yeah, but I mean, the trip wasn't that bad. I mean, low-key, I've probably gotten like the best sleep I have.
Fair fucking enough. Day one worth
a
it.
few tournaments.
You're from LA, right? I had a brother that lived there for a while.
Nice. What part?
Downtown.
Oh, cool, cool. Wait, like what part of downtown, or just like downtown generally?
I cannot tell you more specifics.
That's fair. That's fair. It's sent out. It's just one in the case. First,
We have ours now. I'll set it up for you.
Oh, wait, yeah.
I'm good with the responses.
So I have not even looked to see if I've received it yet. 1 second.
You said one in case.
Daniel, one in case, right?
Yep.
Okay. Is everyone good?
I got it, yeah.
Yep.
Panel.
I always forget.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're good. No worries.
Hmm?
No, you're good. Okay. Cool. Everyone's good. All right, then.
Blackness is a side of fungibility that is shaped by and through conquest. The acid analysis of power is read through grammar, suffering under the analytic of gender, sexuality, primitive accumulation / labor, which concedes abolition / revolution, apostasy, human suggest that always be a black subject king. The 19th, the black holes surges for the government outside. The liberal suffering, the human and Afro pessimism says the black holes speak will do simply seriously. The government suffering, the liberal humanist Marxist feminist career. And trans subjects do not have the capacity to speak about how black people experience the violence of the world. Black thought and theory break with narrativity and fungibility. The black holes, a potential of black fungibility, articulating a world out through mode of existence, by harness, and theorization of fungibility of seeds, humanist and solid grammar. The labor and land property studies relies on humanist epistemes and analysis of body and relation of land labor. The language of lineage analysis moves from pertinent and harmonization of fungibility when revolutions, reforms fail. Black subjects have fall short of abolition, aspirations of writing labor against primitive accumulation, racialization, accumulation, domination, rather than labor is primary motive. Black the subjugation, enjoyment is slavery, overriding value of the figure capacities of blackness and fungibility, the commodity understood, which master going to understand themselves, feelings, blackness is awarded, so to be rendered, black of the world, the conquest of you rendered fluttering in a space outside, the sex gender, sexuality, space, and time to stabilize and fix a human category, no limits or bounds, interrupts valorizations of labor. And debate is built upon the parasitic relation of blackness to one sees failure failure to think alongside through blackness makes the movement complicit in the system of white supremacy. There is no collective demand, assuming such approves the link. Larson 23, the question of heterosexism implications between black and non-black, transfer participants, black, literal, and churches, yet, an energizing effect on activism, scholarship, and debate, leading to many efforts of right, and begin males, amplify the attention of women, LGBT participation, black soldiers were on board with each of these initiatives. If you were on board with it, the pushback against the perceived overemphasis of blackness is debate of long-standing parasitism, writing the goals, tales of black liberation movements, while leaving them behind in unstable domestic endless antagonism of blackness, the ongoing black freedom struggle, it becomes the absent presence that haunts political imagination instead of finding the murderous conclusion as black and civil regimes like queer of Charlotte Trans, queer of color trans theory, queer of transgender politics that pushes against their political formulas can offer. It is a necessity for non-black scholars to study within the black article tradition. Not-black trans debate owes an unpayable debt to black debate because its argumentative origins that because anti-blackness is in response to trans debate, the one he sees lack of attention to you as alongside black scholars promotes a singular issue focus that makes resistance to white institutions impossible. Larson 23 goes to mark within the trans argumentation for total that black queer feminism, the impact of intersectionality should not be downplayed. Black feminist scholarship is wholly within black argumentation when it is disputes by logical determinism, trans arguments are pretty by position of black orientation techniques about founding trans argumentation such as personal experience and organic intellectuals are influenced by black innovation. Trans argumentation picks up Louisville's practices by using conceptual metaphors as disparagements against queer trans argumentation are deployed to repute not-black argumentation has been common for coaches and debaters who evoke gender arguments, counterbalance claims that communities divided inherently racialized according to a critical debate has to reform how we read disparage trans argumentation. These sources agree with them that only minority populations process experience with systemic forces of attacks on the queer trans and feminist argumentation become a technique to get you as black feminist integral to lines between traditional critical debate not black scholars pursue not to pursue out of the ways in which anti-black forms argumentative atmosphere is essential not black trans argumentation creating insurgent causation for payment of death is understanding the possibility trans argumentation political organizing must say with this force of black radicalism dispersing institutional scrutiny political practice against anti-blackness and the storytelling in the one you see requires an discursive dehumanization for the basis point of political movement that creates a bicentric understanding of blackness that requires these continuous to animate the same forms as black violence that oversex black turning case Bruno 2024 we each scholars have written on environmental justice knowledge about blackness is limited health is very likely because this overemphasis fills the need for each communities to prove over to the state often produces inadequate each actions emphasis of black with little attention black life reinforces a largely bisexual consumption of black people dying bodies analytical pleasures as a service of black struggles by reinforcing the humanization of black people this excludes black life and undermines black intellectual life such versus crucially overtaxes suffering the black bodies they perform that respective for emotional living after black violence attack abuse and other experience of the life joy black sense of place and I always drive to advocate for black and trans focus to form a political black place that reifies parasitic attachment of black folks through and not values and new links to the critique this remedying of all black intellectual thought is a rhetorical move to fundamentalize black people's work and take the value of voting negative ways to sustain white supremacy grants at 2018 the underlying drive to position on black people as like African Americans being here noble to replace parasitic relations that is animated with slavery is ongoing afterlife slavery a compromise is the ultimate form of human parasitism discourse and power rely heavily upon often operate as a form of parasitic consumption of black people all movements depict themselves as the new abolitions and the victims who causation of political blackface black states whatever shape non-black people assign it as a rating service that ends up non-black political movements non-black people benefit of perpetrating anti-black as a historical move takes black people suffering and struggles and experiences on behalf of another group and ultimately where there's good for every black demands for freedom and justice let's go into the universalization struggle against slavery it makes everyone simultaneously easier to bring into right of freedom except for black people and humanism and post-humanism couches on what he sees radical politics through shared a sense of struggle which creates an over-representation of man that sustains a logical genocide enslavement and inevitably creates another King 19 humanism and philosophy that of his humanism the center of the world church and liberal humanism religious bourgeois and individual competitive subject and over into the humanism not as a radical humanist who challenges a Christian God rational man and ideal version of the human investor the constructed the category of as a black humanism view native black people as a saint genocide violence and enslavement at the bottom of the race human order humanism requires black identity humanization the ideal proper human is culturally depicted or overrepresented winter and other black ecolonial scholars such as France would not argue committing humanism Marxist feminist versus humanism emerge within a universal struggle however insufficient native and Caribbean black American woman is subject there versus humanism would be subject to scrutiny the very order creates a norm and heavily and other pronounced humanism to include the black man but not the black woman gender belief subjects I refuse the one he sees called to make resistance theory predictable that uncontainable towards a loophole retreat that centers the analytical black fungible fugitivity that resists white anxiety so Western humanism King 19 black fungibility former aggressive which is fine and unpredictable black struggles resistance monitoring with fungibility with unpredictable uncontainable loophole retreat understanding fungibility of fugitivity figure sides of the point out now two sides of the point out black fungibility versus conventional the points of fungibility is wholly as a space of black the accumulation the religion limits black fungibility represents possibility black fungible fugitivity and expansive disruption to become data libraries on black studies disperse Western humanist style of fungibility constitutional fungibility is elaborated on knowability unpredictability demonic fungibility of each capture and liminal shifting space that cannot be reduced to water fungibility is responsive power place no federal domination marks blackness as an open space figurative material exchange fungibilities is in fact the product of white anxiety representation is how to get in front of it or anticipate black fugitive movement black rebellion required be unpredictable and uncontainable field British scholars to control black movement through representations of fungibility is one directional flow of white domination in unpredictable ways and white and non-black bodies engage in a study of blackness within a body politic that attempts to organize the world as knowable through an affect desire blackness
blackness embodiment, King 19, that body, that represents different kinds of futures, just overall, each conjured in the whole, what kind of, plausible notions of actuality, animated, this embodied act as a desire, desperation, as a sensation, kinetic energy, create the bodies and affect critical theories and their methodology, so to see the effect of body of the black desire, world making the futures body is a party in a epistemological problem, presented by the limits of visuality, perception without visuality, so perceptual anchor, the body does not become the primary field of orientation of the social world, does in order based on the somatic or body reasoning with the will of the flesh that precedes the body, and that requires non-black scholars to refuse it to see if favor submitting to black chaos instead of how non-black trans studies save us. You should ask how does black trans studies save you? King 19, I acknowledge that I'm no way working on the other that has become an exercise, how it feels to acknowledge that arousal as a sign of black bodies and being rebellion movement and make you feeling an object of study. This under the balance of policies and performance of pure and anti-racist intent, and then the part of white research at the university does not produce scholars interested in producing knowledge or political action, more specifically the eradication of black radicalism. The university trains us to work against every other social sciences to intervene upon the improve the fields of studies, to train with development able to improve abstract, most humanistic existing fields of question, how to advance to begin how honor receive black studies are rarely evil and non-black people ask how black studies save them the empathetic practice of becoming pessimistic, the chaos, the power of black presence and embodiment that can undo reorganize by non-body in different terms, and if white people impose the ways of them, their self-dependence on rendering the black body a captive and being for witnesses can interrupt the impulse to objectify black life. Case. Voting the presumption, nothing about the 1EC changes status quo. Every move that they have names such as Stonewall, the Compton cafeteria, rights, pro-Palestine process, and more have already happened. Nothing about the 1EC makes them strong. The evidence is very clear, and that transparent look of the revolution is transversality already exists, which means that you can put negative on presumption because Iowa has not met their burden to prove a few reasons. One, conflation, they can place cultural practice setting the burden. At House Solvency, a separate introduction, new knowledge evolves, and infinitely we're going to debate about how new is new enough means lectures, seminars, article books, all solves through leveraging. They strategically deploy the existing work activists like Stonewall and the 1EC to justify their own call for the ballot, which undergoes the work activists doing beyond the university and demotivate teams for engaging revolutionary politics, and also proves they're parasitic because they can't obviously help people inside this debate space because nothing about the 1EC spells out 3 unending stories possible to determine we sufficiently done their method which classifies radical activism in the starting point of transness, reaffirms the project of dog whistle, blindness that's false and violent reductionism and equivocation to override conquest, anti-blackness, third case, our analysis must come first to understand anti-black violence, bunker, 24 race war, use the sexual and gender pressures, this is a very called eradicate queer trans life, not in and anti-black is colonialism, to usually be transgender sex, all this book, and genocide, describe as trans violence, going so far as to identify trans peoples and exchange region and knowledge, the equates, and transgender violence with that blackness and trans is such the bells echo white, nationalism, all mobilizing special lines, black lines, the cabal sympathy and looting and transgenocide, exact metaphorical and theoretical elasticity from genocide, that is a black people return to we as a form of genocide, this divine Congress is going to signify whiteness, sublimating race war, the trans debate emerges ontologically account of civil society, this securities and the answer black world, the trans debate is not ability to regulate trans life status, to theorize gender trans advocates are the girls of position, reduction, trans, as an ontological meaning as a trans, this is ontologically who is ricochetation, a chamber of white solipsism, cut the card at solipsism, and the 1EC mimics the failures of empathetic identification, which projects one self onto the other, producing dehumanization, Harvard 97, empathy, production of oneself into the other, better understand the other, production of one's own personality to an object with the answer region, and the object of the own emotions, sense of fungibility of the company body does not reinforce the equality of the company body by reducing the body to evidence at the very effort to establish humanity, and say that their projection suffering in society, empathetic identification spectacularizes violence with no redress. Analytic. Okay, I'm good. Okay.
Okay, I want to start with the very first piece of King evidence that you read.
Yeah.
How is this piece? It says, quote, well, not situating itself as Afro-pessimistic, black souls take Wilderson's claim seriously, and then goes on to say that the King is situating within the genealogy of Spillers. So my question is, how has the 1NC theorized gender?
Yeah, so our argument is that gender is overcoded by the relations of fungibility, i.e. the ways in which like black trans women are made fungible, but we've also made arguments about why we can't reuse those things, which is the King evidence and the Buckner evidence, because it folds black trans women into the fold of
gender
humanism.
is overcoded by relations of fungibility. What does that mean?
No, it's the inverse.
What?
You said gender overcodes fungibility.
Fungibility is overcoded by relations of gender. Sure, sorry.
Yeah.
Misspoke. What does that mean?
Yeah, so i.e. the ways in which like your impacts of the 1EC explain like hyper visibility of like queer and trans people. We think that all of those things are made possible by the process of genocide and enslavement, i.e. you don't have like policing institutions and mass incarceration without the demonization of like black people.
Yes, of course, but how does that answer? So is your argument that
argument is that fungibility explains gender?
There is no blackness, there is no gender that can cohere to blackness. Is this your argument?
There is no gender that can cohere to blackness.
Yes.
Our argument is that the 1AC's analysis of gender is something that can never cohere to
Why?
blackness. We have made arguments about empathetic identification. Like that in ways in which
but now we're talking about the Hartman card, which was on the case as empathetic identification. Okay, I guess I have a question about that. What part of the 1AC do you think was a projection of suffering that did empathetic identification?
Yeah, for sure. So we think there are arguments to be made about like how you can talk about black trans women, but like me and Curtis obviously are not like black trans women, so it's like, what is the uniqueness to debating your app? Like you obviously don't give any material or pride. Like voting for you does nothing in that regard.
Okay, but so is your argument that any single time we talk about black trans women, that representation is always
No, I
already a
think
black
there's
trans woman
also
suffering?
other arguments we made that tie back to the Hartman evidence, i.e. the ways in which you could pornotrope that violence without any redress.
Because pornotroping is a really kind of like, is a relatively specific thing. And I guess I'm wondering where the 1AC has done that.
Yeah, it's like we are making arguments about like how the 1AC like does nothing for black trans women.
But that's
like
not what pornotroping
in a
means,
vacuum.
though. Hang
in
on,
a
that's
vacuum.
not what pornotroping means. Where has the one? Can you pull a line from the 1AC?
Yeah, like our argument is like the internal link to that is like.
Okay, so for example, you have this line that talks about in 1947, Boyd and Gordon coined the term tipping points, and the example that you give is not in relation to white trans people, but is in relation to black families being moved to neighborhoods.
Yes.
Example,
Yes.
like, and talks about things like organized abandonment.
Yes.
red
Do you
light
think we
policing.
should think those? Does the alternative think we should think those things separately?
What? That's not our argument. Our argument
Oh.
is that you've only utilized it insofar as you can get gains for yourself, which is anti-black fungibility.
10.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I got you.
because that largely eliminates it. I'm gonna send you this too. You need to read. Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you. I'll check if anything else, but. I sent it.
Deal with this. And I deal with that. Cool. 750 left. Show you everything.
I'm gonna stand up to a little stretch.
Yep. We'll check, make sure it's all right.
I'm assuming there's cards.
Yeah, they're inside.
Okay.
Ooh, is that what you said to stand up for?
Gray, do you want to speak further up so you have to project less?
Low-key, could you throw it out like that? That's maybe?
Yeah, I will.
Are you also gonna? Are you gonna speak from up there?
A little bit.
I was thinking low key the same
No,
thing.
that's fair. I strained my voice this weekend. So
No, you're good.
A little quiet.
We can set up like a little table thing, but you might have to push the iPad
I will
back.
move the iPad.
Yeah.
I'll do this. close enough to everybody, but not too close, right? Okay.
I think it's chilling.
I'm sorry, this is like the most sound. Okay, yeah.
Anyone not got it?
I got it. Just give me a single second.
You're good.
Okay, let's see order.
Order case K.
Okay. I'm good on that.
1 second.
Yep.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
I have to cut somebody out with it. Okay, I'm ready. So sorry. One
Alright,
second.
you're good. We affirm a praxis of transversality and alternate energy politics sustain communities in the collective assemblage where trans-molecular revolutions occur. As well as the molecular and we see enunciation of black and trans lives that always exceeds the capability mapping morally by the fashion affecting metabolism because there is no other world, but it can't be this one. This debate is a question of emergence versus emergency here. A series that Christ powers the world. Energy politics derived from a structural field will cause the fashion affecting metabolism that is catalyzed through the tipping point. Transversality is a praxis and method to understand the way that crisis is necessary to ensure the world. White flight to trans-tipping point to climate tipping point to core resource engage in a process of transversal linkages reveals the way the map of political matter makes necessary constitutive violence. The impacts that way. 1. Moralization. The overrepresentation of ontology and political hierarchy as inevitable and natural, meaning the totalizing the forces of Western humanism is both an impact and a theory of power for the 1AC. The K-links back to this when they inevitalize sort of the questions of fungibility and anti-blackness before gender. But this is how the logic of accreditation, return, inclusion, and exclusion, not and reincorporate our creative intimacies back into the world. And that internal link turns the K because it reproduces these racialized grammars and gender matrices that construct the world, inevitalizing the overrepresentation of Western men. That's Bruce. And 2. Christ's logic forms the organized abandonment, environmental destruction, and fascism are all crises necessary to ensure the world. The atheism attempt to end that world, which will always reproduce those antagonisms, which means the one claim I have to win this debate is that ontologized structures of violence exist within fluid structures of Western humanism. If I've won this, I've won that structures are malleable, and any understanding that doesn't presume that is inevitably going to recapitulate to it. And on presumption, 1. Vote is a good idea. Transversality solved by orienting desire towards the end of this world. 2. Roles of judges, paradise, entanglement. Transversality should teach you to reevaluate your relations with the interconnections between crisis and questions of anti-blackness and trans antagonism. And 3. Examples of solemnity. A. Edward Glissant's work in the Caribbean, which used academic theorizing, was Guattari, with his own praxis and resistance. B. Zor's One's collection in Oakland, which uses space as a ballroom and art to provide self-defense and care for trans women. And C. Dearest comrade that protests sterilization, our fates are inexorably tied. This deals with conflation because 1. We don't think there's an inside-outside debate. We think debate is a microcosm of the world shown through violence that happens within that spills out and violence outside that spills into debate. So we should use this space as a time to sort of plan proximally and to theorize on our time. It is important to understand positionality and praxis in the world. Debate can orient desire. And they say movements say make comparison to the argument. No, the movements are organizational models. We should learn from them. All their legends and Ed says learning from these sort of histories are radically good, which means all the large and evidence is the reason why the case was good. And leveraging an argument, no, transversality isn't a particular movement good. It's movement good itself, which is why we need to build linkages to understand the strategic interconnections between these movements. And unending story is good. Large and theorizes that we should continue to test these things. It's an AF argument. Final argument. Buckner flows AF is discussing white people snitching. This is recreated through the attachment to the human link turned and white cross sex that proves transversality is good for reorienting desire away from what causes these white trans folks to become fucked up in the first place. And the question at the end of the card is said, should this world exist? This is our argument. This is why the ONC ends with we should end this world rather than try to reproduce it. Final, the Hartman arguments. First, there is an erasure that said any alternative that requires white trans people to not attend to anti-blackness is a reason to reject the alternative on the critique because the link differential between the one I see described on pornotropy and what the 2NC will say is small, it's unwinnable. And any offense comes from our position as white, but I'll articulate a fundamental link differential. Here we must not think of the tipping point of white flight as separate from the trans tipping point or the colonial devastation that produced the tipping point. If we win our series, these things are fundamentally connected, then can't win this debate. The cross-sex of the 1NC was embarrassing because they haven't pulled a single line that proves pornotropy. It's a term of art. Don't let them change it in the block. We don't do it. We use discuss or Vern Cox as a non-event starting how the interview created sort of a pseudo tipping point that allowed the fast effect of metabolism to mobilize. That is our argument. Cool. On to the K. First, picks our battery direction team about to prioritize comparison between the AF and NEG. Two impacts. One, disavows the pigmented transversal relation they converted between our strat and theirs, which undermines creative emergence and debate by atomizing their emphases through traditional zero-sum competition logic. And two, critical clash. They move advocacy and forces debate itself to show critical clash to overturn any frameworks or argument they want to go for about maximizing forms of competition. But top level is the alt must solve the links. Threshold for negation not simply identify the links. The Long Beach must negate the project of transversality, its benefits, and provide an alternative that solves. Every link is terminally non-unique. Rejection does not produce uniqueness. If we want to link this to the performance be equally willing to reject them, meaning we need to win. The alternative is a metric for evaluation rather than simply a risk of the link, which means the question is the debate of the molecules. Is an impact term as the alternative because it's a form, a typical logic that characterizes the sort of revolutionary potential in debate as always already one thing. No more without molecular. Molecularity addresses how resistance operates on an interpersonal basis, while molarity only addresses how that is scaled up. Our understanding is as attunement to the molecular understands how desire is malleable, and only that justifies the perm-dubo's argument because it is try or die to reorient desire in a world where these forms of anti-blackness become inevitable. And proof on the alternative proper. Blackness and transits are apositional, not oppositional. The consolidation of Western Madness figurability of a transitive grammar of fungibility and immutability exchange that cites blackness and transits as the conditions of possibility for humans. Associative power and next archival or ratio to coherent links which denies black and trans social life as a set of invention in the face of ongoing black and trans death. Only the YC activates modes of invention that make possible the inhabitation of unlivable worlds. Norton 17. The transitality of blackness transit represents not an origin but an entry point. Transitivity is the condition for the human as trans expressive primordial being for which difference is formed blackness in opposition to trans in as much as black articulates the paradox of non-being in oppositional flesh such a view necessitates transitive mechanisms. The grammars that require object black and trans are brought in the same frame by fungible, signified, and interchangeable ubiquitous in the logic of transatlantic exchange, in which difference are neither absolute nor binary. Interchangeable exchange becomes the rubric that situates black and trans in the order of things that produce and maintain an ethno class of Western man. Marks that card at man, which means that justifies the perm. King agrees that we need unbecoming like the YC to fight our position from within it. That's the AF and YC Bruce. King 19. That's where we reverse the formation, new kind of body.
You can
body
also
without
skip.
organs. Skip it. I'm just going to reinsert.
Sorry, was that the rehighlighting or was that King?
That was the rehighlighting.
You don't have to read the rehighlightings because we
Sure.
didn't insert them.
And proves any risk of a permutation is sufficient to outweigh the that is the moralization stuff I did above, and more I'll get you down. But first is the King links. They say Theodore makes our argument that blackness is outside of gender, reinserting YC King here, and it's internal double turn with the Bruno evidence, which says the analytic of the flesh is bad, means they all can't solve the links. Reinserting the Bruno evidence here and proves an ungendering DA. Red voice 22. So the audience exists, it's reformed, which speaks of the capacity of African men or understand something about the female that no other community had the opportunity to understand. But some to recognize the note absence within the archives of resistance for black trans. The positionality of players not merely sexism, but specifically cis-sexism and intersexism. Black trans women are categorically race or Irish have been reconfigured as overrepresentation facilitated through a particular interpretation of ungendering does not properly locate the transgressive womanhood. Ungendering is imposed. A misappropriation of conceptualization becomes insistence that particular distinction supersedes and subsumes all other forms. In other words, misreading comes in the claim that race has not replaced gender. And next argument I'm going to go to is Grimes link, no, I'm going to link to it. One, it's misreading as YC. Say we cause equivocation between the anti-blackness and other forms of violence that sustain the fashion effect of metabolism in the world, but this will lose them to debate because they have committed to articulating why anti-blackness is completely insulated from colonialism, trans antagonism, white supremacists, immigration politics, etc. per cross of the YC. And two, there's an equivocation, no equivocation in the YC. We have articulated a common thread that undergirds Western man, which must be made at the level of every day. Thus, any risk of the F solved, any dissent is per means the affirmative is the necessary corrective. And three, the auto and fail because it moralizes anti-blackness from other forms of violence, which has these entanglements remain persist and anti-blackness persists from it. Now, on to the Larson evidence. One, the negatives of misreading Larson. It tells blackness moralized transdebate. There's only a white transdebate, only sinking transversality and entanglement. Both concludes that we cannot answer the question of what is transdebate without already thinking black debate in the legacies of the Louisville Project. So the link can't just be your trans or you read trans studies that from your white. That also means we solve the Larson evidence because to win this applies, they need to win a link to the F that cannot be resolved transversely. Finally, impact trans and arguments they say about white trans people should not think it all together because when we don't take seriously and think the implications of blackness and anti-blackness together, that is when the arguments become parasitic, that's when arguments become pornotropic, that's when the impacts of the creed become replicated. And trans and black KVK is too spelled in a variety of unpredictable directions will also inform me how we make decisions outside the space. Debate exists outside the normal need for state engagement. Thus the rules of judges prioritize the strategy that stays indebted to trans studies and black representation. Lesson 23.
You know what? Skip that card and read the King evidence.
Yeah. You'll grab it. Go grab it while I finish up some stuff. Other top level links they try to go for are so thinking alongside black trans authors, that's the way you want to see wow, Norton, etc. They go for a debt isn't deference card, they will link from the value of the Larson evidence because the question of debt should always be one of testing competing relationalities and understanding how we can best refine our practice to usurp this world. When I see Bruce deals with the rest of the links because we doesn't require proximity, which means any argument they try and go for about the relationalities we build is already answered by a prior question of how that relation can sort of be fragmented but nevertheless coalesce around the same forms of vibration that we think are good. It means King for the affirmative because we are winning the sort of transversality. The method can be beneficial then proves King 20. To consider trans employment move beyond the fixed category of the fixed trans functions and move within an origin point of travel, bike and serialize upon the environment, finding a new vocabulary, critical genealogy, process trans to consider transversality, bike study to take up trans space, apply to plantation individuality, sworn critically against the way scientific gaze over plantation hierarchies, or bike such as visible white woman protected, and since also I'm going to go to a particular, cool. The only other argument here I have to deal is any residual risk of the Bruno stuff, but no, they aren't going to win because the double turn above proves all insurance Saudi wants to divest from the sort of notion of the ungendered flesh which we've critiqued per the cross of the one NC and means only. And it means they can't win a link because we've won that there isn't these forms of representation we see, but Modi proved we're good to disrupt us. Alright, I'm good.
Okay,
I sent it.
cool. I'll wait for Peter to get that.
Yeah, let me see.
Review level. Yep. Or find someone to review level. It does not need to be you.
It just doesn't energy drink work.
And do you want a Celsius? Fair enough.
I'm believing that probably not. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Proceed.
Singular second. I just need to, like my word is weird, like I can't edit increments off of each one, so I have to like go over the whole thing.
Let's see them move. He was right by, my brother was right by a market, kind of like an open air market that had a bunch of different restaurants in it. Does that ring any bells?
There's a lot of
That's
references. That's
fair,
all.
okay, yeah. Central, I know. I'll figure it out later.
Okay, I got the card, I'm good.
Cool.
Okay, or actually, I want to ask a question really quickly. Really quickly, when arguments become parasitic, what's this argument?
Yeah, our arguments when we don't serialize it all together, that's when arguments begin to form parasitic relationalities with Wagner.
Okay, that's good. Then you're good.
Okay, theoretical reasons to reject the team just picks, right?
Just picks.
Okay, first question, I guess, when you say, or does voting end the world?
We think transversality is a practice to end the world. We think voting AF is good if the 1AC has been proven to be a good idea.
So,
Because we
but
think we
the
should
1AC
use the
like
A-
doesn't like materially end the world, right? Like after they insert.
We think
like,
the
valve.
1AC works to reorient desire. We think we're in a debate.
But like,
We think
yeah.
debate only has certain capacities for what
Okay,
it can teach
okay.
us, but it is a microcosm for
Okay,
us. We
that's
should
fine.
use it to test these sort of questions of
that's
obligation.
fine. I want to ask about like you made an argument on presumption. As unending story is good, so like it's okay to like have unending stories about
So-
like, the death of black trans women? Question mark.
No, because that's not what the unending story argument was in the
You
1AC
said unending
either.
story is good verbatim.
Yeah, and you said unending stories are when we don't have an end to political telos that's said. A subpoint, we do, it's the end of the world.
Well,
B
you just
subpoint,
conceded
no.
that you
We
don't
should
abolish the world
continually-
after this round is over.
But that presumes uniqueness for that argument, i.e., your alternative has been articulated as a
Well, okay.
refusal and a
Actually,
loophole
let's
retreat.
talk about this. Well, I didn't hear any response to y'all. But anyways, I
Well,
guess
I
like
don't
I
know.
guess like on
First,
like
I
I guess
own
like
the
on the
covenant, to
framework
be
stuff.
honest.
I guess like on the framework stuff, you're just like the ult must solve the links.
Yeah.
What does
Yep.
it mean to solve?
You have posited links to the 1AC and to the world that implicate how violence operates. We think the alternative burden should be to resolve the violence they describe.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
I don't see why that's like a double standard. But anyways, I guess I'm going to
We
ask
think we've
about like.
proposed a strategy that solves. We think this debate is key to sort of test out that strategy and see what
I mean,
it's good.
nothing really
I don't
spills
know.
out. I mean, we kind of agree on that. But I guess like then I want to
Debate
ask
is a
about like
microcosm
I want to
of
ask about the
what's going
overview. The overview says like
Yep.
the world, a world that is not this one. What world does the 1AC think
No,
would
no,
look
no.
like a good one?
There is no other world.
There
There
is no
can't
other
be
world?
this one. We should end this world.
Okay, but there's no other worlds.
Not right now, no, we can't just opt out.
Okay,
We
then.
exist in the history of all that has come before us, which is why we must attune to those entanglements, which is precisely what transversality does. That's the Bruce evidence and the Modi evidence.
So then I guess like what can a new world look like is a better question.
We don't think that is the question we ought to ask till the world has been ended. We
But
don't
how?
think.
Like people can just like still be anti-black in a new world.
You're positing the question. You're right. That is why we must end this world.
We agree.
That
Yes.
is
That is
our
why we must
argument
end this world.
about the unending struggle of transversality, which is the question you asked earlier in cross-ex. That's why that flows affirmative decisively.
Why do black trans women have to constantly labor for an unending struggle?
Wait, where do you think?
You
Where-
said unending
what is the
struggles are
link?
good. Like,
What is the link?
Well,
A subpoint after the force anyone to labor.
A very quick 10. Quite the doc.
You can use that stand if you want to.
Yeah, I like.
Unless, okay. Sorry, I'll move it.
Actually, wait. I'm gonna take a slight sliver second of prep here. 9:45. 9:42. 9:42.
yeah. Okay, done.
All right, 9:45. Duh. Okay. I'm just gonna compile cards. All right. But for now, the order is just a critique. Yeah, I guess I gotta get the cards together. Dubs. I want to say there's only 2 cards. Oh, actually, no, there's a couple re-highlights. Okay, it should be sent.
Alright, I'm good. Other people are.
Okay, Barry, you're also good.
Yep.
Daniel, so you're good. Will, Asia, Kujwa, Toya.
Did you say the word?
Just a critique.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, assume we're all good. Jared, you're also good, right? Okay, I'll start with Blackness is marked by a structural logic of conquest in order to feel Western desires of flexibility through the ability economy, the desire to seek black flesh is embedded in a psychological drive to create racial hierarchies to subordinate black and indigenous people, then less a human king, so that the rational man or ideal of the human is invented to the construction of a category of otherness and a symbolic death form of humanism and the view of the black and indigenous other as a space of death. It was to say that a genocidal form of violence is the same as the bottom of the racialist solar order. That means that humanism requires black and indigenous humanization that perpetuates between the binary of black people and the slave and the indigenous people from the man. Now, from issues that the 1ER and the 1EC cannot explain, we're too violent on the level of black trans people because blackness overcomes the ability the way we look at gender because blackness is seen as masculine or feminine based on affordability and utility, i.e. black trans men and women become rapeable because blackness takes the shape of frig or whatever the human wants it to, which means that we're winning a root cause to their impact that only the alternative can solve. But our argument is not that there is no gender or zero gender, but black affordability overcomes the ability to analyze gender because of the utility of black flesh for non-black people, which we link debate. Now, first argument is a king and knight one. This is the alternative more, i.e. the only way we can stop anti-blackness and trans antagonism if we stop black fundability, which means that if we win the YC is reinvented into humanism, you should vote negative because it means that we've created a better form of transversality, means that the alternative solves it better. And secondly, it's cool that your card just name drop your method with King, but King is also about how we should engage in the question of transit, which means we theorize labor and black fundability before that object. But this card is not about white transit. It proves they have funded the work of black people again, which links to King and proves that they only seek to invest and read black objects. It means that they get an easy permutation ballot. Now, next is the building economy. It's an impact by fire, black and multiplied dollars of society, where fears other argument integrate that Chico et al. To 11. The politicians make poor people benefit from black people, share with benefit and benefits upon litigios and all we know to repeat evidence, not make people hate black people who do so the cost of the tell the political economy more important than the building economy. We see the building economy anytime there's a problem that takes a little proportion in the U.S. economy, 2 million people fight fact doing it. So I have for the U.S. science will give you a little bit of fear black people to Trump to the political economy, the cost benefit. Now they take another example of power for is crack cocaine is those who are identical copy. Actually, black people crack scenes and 100 more dying and they was a victim of extreme father because of phobias and police. I'm on to you we get through this civil society and for their aggression that the welfare queen of the black thing is eternally misused by white women and some of their society text of ignorance. And the impact of black fundability, which outweighs in terms of case logic fundability, sets up the modeling movement for environmental destruction, anti-blackness, and trans antagonism to the perfection of dehumanization of slaves. Therefore, slavery is justified every modern anti-trans bill today, i.e. the banning of legal rights personhood through cases like the Dred versus Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown v. Boer all prove that anything they recreate anti-blackness means that they justify the same violent power structure that social hierarchy that make bans such as on trans healthcare impossible in the first place, that it justifies white supremacy, slavery, and dispossession that makes climate change and exploitation impossible. Now, it's impossible to solve. Now, first argument is structured immalleable. This is a double turn with every argument they read about King because it proves that they have seen the structures as immalleable, but have made a when they see analysis about how the world must end, it proves that there's no argument they can go for about the world being malleable because Twisty Crockett was very clear that there's no other world than this one. It proves that they have regarded engaged in the performance contradiction after reach rejected team. The impact of white fluidity allows for them to shift their advocacy based on what they can do. The win proves that they recreate violence. Now, framework. Our world about is vote for the team that best challenges anti-black fundability and debate of few net benefits. One, ontology winning, or digital humans that meet eternity after. The entire solvency of the app is predicated off of escaping the humans to solve anti-black and anti-trans violence, which means if we want to link, it proves they reproduce humans category responsible for creating trans antagonism. Secondly, education is the best way to analyze trans antagonism and anti-blackness through the legal fundability, which is the King 19 evidence that subsumes all their arguments about spillers and generating this habit. Secondly, 3 is testing your broad methods to create actual movements against trans antagonism could be challenged the root cause of anti-black fundability. Also, AFCON, do not let them shift out of their advocacy other evidence because anything else allowed for white people to escape accountability for the methods proven by cross-check they cannot tell us how they solve intercommunal violence between black trans people and non-black trans people. Now, an extended Washington non-black trans debate has an unpayable debt to black debate through its performance and through its adoption of the black radical tradition. Means you owe it to black debate to make this debate about humanism and fundability because it structures the way that anti-black and trans antagonism functions. Now, first argument is that the role of judge is state and then the black and trans debate. The first largest ever to be read succeeds because it says that the only way that trans debate can formulate is through black debate. It proves that if you want to vote for a role of ballot, you should vote for R because only R supersedes the ability for trans debate to formulate. The first argument is the alternative cannot solve. Obviously, does not apply to you because crossings was damning and you said you did not have to solve for the material impacts and you had no way to get to the end of the world. Proves it's a racist double standard and a reach rejected team because it proves they upper the threshold in order to shift out of in order to beat black people and prove that they hold to pretended double standard that they do not have to adhere to. Next argument is that links are non-unique. Damning for them because it proves that the new world they create does not give a fuck about black people because see as the anti-black violence is already happening in status quo without eventually solve it. It proves that this is a performative reason for why they engage in anti-black logic because when black people will call them out in the movement, they will say, oh well, this shit's not unique anyways, but we have to fight for the end of the world, which never fucking comes. Next argument is that tipping points is bad. We definitely turn it if we prove you reinvest in humanism. The next argument is try or die, change desire. There is no desire to change humanism through the affirmative, but they also said there's no way they can solve it, which proves that they like access to it. They say the perm, you take and solve Larson, that will be later. They say when we look together, it creates parasitism. This is an example of the building economy, i.e. you must always forcefully join black people in your movement in order to get philic-phobic drive. So this proves that they link all to our office. Next argument is that creating relate to rationality to the answer to the prior question. You ask yourself, what relationship does the YC create that was not already there? Our argument is that utilizing and fundamentalizing these movements as a reason for the app being a prior question is what allows for white people to fundamentize the suffering of trans people such as Martin P. Johnson and saying it should be the start for our movement without ever fucking doing anything for people like in proximity to her families. Now, the alternative is to reject the YC in favor of embracing the black show. It is an interconnected relationality between black native and black native and trans people of color that rejects former white humanism and post-human favor of smashing the icon humanism that reentrenches ecological racism and trans antagonism. King says the alternative solves the case to embrace the loophole retreat acts after refusal to escape white transversality that seeks to reject the co-option and fundamentation of black and native suffering. suffering. It is an active rejection of white forms of white flight, and rhythmatic movement that seems to reshuffle racial hierarchy that seeks to make humanism more palatable when in reality it only sanitizes ways those lines of flight just move to whiteness as superior. The alternative solves the case by creating new modes of raciality, not rely on lines of flight or rhythms that seek to categorize different modes of being. The alternative results in the destruction, ordering, and ranking would ensure that ethical relationship to each other by not viewing the relationship as the post-human, but rather through mutual responsibility and categorizes all the people being on a level playing field as opposed to article understanding. The alternative theorizes every aspect of the app better by being equally indebted, which destroys the justification review of view folks on different level with disengaging the logic to create racialized formulation and exploitation for it proves we solve trans antagonism because we have one that we solve the root cause of that violence. Now, pigs are bad. One alternative is not a pig, but this is a reason to reject the team because it's a form of predictive policing, i.e. you can accuse black people of shit that they were never going to do in the first place, which just fight through a criminalization, such as reject the team logic to prove that they reinvest in forms of anti-blackmailing, which proves the trans antagonism or the trans molecular revolution they create are in opposition to each other. Black and trans are in opposition to each other will be disproven by a link debate. Now, firstly, I'm going to extend the Grimes link, extend the revolution link, the Wayne State's understanding of trans and blackness as an attempt to mobilize black flesh against the nation state for non-white gains. That's what Grimes evidence means. Rejecting Wayne State's call to endorse engagement of black trans and white trans revolution movements because it enables white trans people to co-opt the tactics and suffering of black people and then throw them to the front line in the trans revolution to co-opt the philic nature of black trans into intimacy, i.e. think about those times that Marsha P. Johnson get co-opted by white trans movements, then those movements do nothing for her family but still profit off her death. The argument is that it proved the Grimes link. Cross-section is embarrassing. They cannot tell you how the Wayne State solved intercommunal violence between black and trans people and non-black trans people, and the framing issue that the Wayne State crisis was good. I claim how they create connections between black trans folk and non-black trans folk. They cannot tell you how they stop non-black trans people from calling black trans people niggers and slurs because nothing about being in line in the world stops intercommunal violence from happening in the first place. It proves that nothing about the African solving the only mass way intercommunal violence happens in these revolutions. It proves they cannot Jedi mind trick white racist trans people away because nothing about saying we're all in this together gets rid of the bill 9 to exploit black flesh. It proves that they ensured the Malay trans regulated revolution and that the black people are only funded by non-black trans folks without any reason, only further humanist category. The next argument is that they have not talked about how black and trans destructure each other. Every single war in the Kim evidence assume how fungibility set the stage for a vast environmental racism and racism broadly proves that we do have an analytic common threat is impact turned by the idea that there is intercommunal violence. It proves that even in the end of the world there's still correlation. The next argument is that the app is a correction. Obviously not true because we have one that we link to it. They say stopping entanglement is bad. This is the example of the coherence relationality link that we've made that says you always forcefully conjoin black people without their consent, considering that there are no black trans women in the video right now. It's proved that they force a cohesion on the black trans women when they're not there. Now, I'm going to extend Bruno. I was called a fundamental black suffering of black communities in the parasitic types of black flesh. That proves every argument on the Chico evidence I read above. It proves that the Wayne State is a form of spectacular activism that uses suffering of black people in order to get those community voices cried out by white trans people who get weaponized against black radical activists on the way to pacify struggle. The first argument they'll go for is a double turn, but our argument that the alternative is not just a focus on black death, rather the one way to which we can create actual lines of flight away from white people will prove that we don't link to this argument. There's a card I was going to read. I forgot to put in the doc, but I will have Daniel read it. I'm sorry. I love you. And proves they cannot solve it. Now, I'm going to extend the post-humanism link, extend the king evidence proper. The Wayne State trans molecular revolution is an attempt to embody the Deleuze good target ways to understand how they can develop the black Canadian studies. Now, research to highlight the main author of the Wayne State relied on their conception of reterritoriality and rhythmatic movements, which are how they describe it, which I inserted in blue. There are a couple impacts to this. One, their embracement of subject post-humanism and rhythmatic movement reconstitute colonialism. That's T17 natural rational many the greatest of the center normalization of the black body and native peoples. The kill person no reason knowledge and self-relation post-humanism will persist because individual and life from the black and native people are rendered dead. While it is the subject of fragments of the rhythm moving that is transcended and between a certain life created the chaos of black to the back of the native revolt structures unlike white churches that even the guitar so the ground around the around for state outside the state mandates. So in the King 17 card, it says, it's in the center, it says, even in the Deleuze guitarist idea, it ends at state mandate, which is the comma.
Yeah, here you go. No, okay, let's plug in.
You good?
No,
Yeah, I'm
Okay. First, I want to talk about the post-humanism link. What's the line from the 1AC that defends post-humanism?
you defend Deleuze and Guattari's understanding of rhythmatic movements, which the 2AC kind of gives the link when you said we embrace movement as itself, not movements.
What's the correlation between the concept of a rhizome or like a line of flight also from the 2AC and the post-humanism?
Well, our argument is that we are a line of flight away from anti-black
No,
fundamentalism.
I'm with you. Just
Yeah.
where do those theories discuss the post-human?
Well,
What is the post-human?
The post-human is the idea that we can transcend sort of normative humanist roles in order to create the more superior human. Our argument is that Deleuze and Guattari use this theory in order to create new
Right,
concepts
so
of social racial hierarchies, which we think the
we
King ever
can't-
described as a racist form of colonial dispossession.
We can't transcend normative humanist roles, but also the alternative creates lines of flight away from normative humanism.
No, it creates lines of flight away from post-humanism.
Where does the word lines of flight come from?
I assume it'd be Deleuze and Guattari, correct? Am I wrong about that?
What is a line of flight?
Line of flight is the idea that we can create, or at least move away from sort of categories in order to create distinction or leverages between certain categories.
It's just a movement away.
I wouldn't, well, no, I said a lot after that. It's like, it's the attempt to sort of like transcend social hierarchies, which I think is bad. At least that's the way the King Evans describes it.
Okay, next argument I want to talk about, you said instead of posthumanism is somewhere on the K-flow, it theorizes everyone on equal ground. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
So our argument is that the 1AC sort of closes the gap between understanding how social racial hierarchies work. We think that the understanding of posthumanism is what allows for it to be formed of colonialist possession, because it allows for the posthuman to see the regular human or the non-human as fungible because
Yeah,
they're not human,
I
which
guess
allows for exploitation.
I'm more
Our argument is that
curious-
destroying that thing through refusals of the 1AC is key to create those distinctions, which
Does
we
the
think are bad.
1AC create humanism?
Yeah, we think you do,
The
100%.
1AC uniquely created humanism?
Well, created? No, I thought you said create. Well, no, you said created?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think the 1AC necessarily created the category human, but we think you reinvested it, which is the
Wait,
link
where?
argument. Every example of your re-highlight, because every 1AC method, like the main author defends Deleuze and Guattari's understanding of posthumanism.
How does refusing
Like the link is very
1AC
clear, I think.
solve for a structure that exists apparently regardless of
So like this is infinitely regressive because 2AC was very clear, like we don't have to solve for your form of violence. Our argument is that we solve an epistemic indite of your research, which we think is net better than the AF, because you said yourself you don't have to solve any of the violence you outlined in 1AC.
So the alternative is an epistemic indite of research.
It's an epistemic refusal of the 1AC, which you think is sufficient. Like this is a KVK debate. We all know we're not going to say AF fills up to broader movements. We think that your research is bad. The alternative is better than your AF.
So this debate is a question of research, and all the judges have heard that it's a question of research.
Sure.
Perfect. Awesome.
People, perfect. Okay, theorizing it together, you say blackness is always a part of question, structure is trans antagonism. How does anti-blackness structure trans antagonism? Just
Yeah, sure.
explain it
Because the
yourself.
King evidence is very clear that the analytic of fungibility is what allows for the creation of gender categories in opposition to the human's interest. Daniel, just I do need to read one card.
Okay, I just have like two highlights, body or doc.
I would prefer not to.
Okay.
I'm gonna send this card. It's gonna be on the alternative. All right, Daniel. I sent it to Jamie. Can you just like grab it from your laptop?
What do you mean?
Like I sent an extra card you do read on the chain. Can you just read that at the top? You just put it up on the
Yeah, sure. Okay. It is sent. Let me know when you got the webinar doc. I'm gonna just get the card back. I just want to read it. Just this card, right? Oh yeah. The alt for the K and the perm. Yeah, just KKs.
Wait, real quick. Did anybody get this this Chico card highlighted weird? Wait, I want to resend this card. I think it got cut. If I just put in the body, it's the same card, but it's like.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
You're starting with the alt?
I'm just reading the card.
Yeah.
Panel good? Alright, I will. Sick. Okay, stop me if no one's ready.
The alternative refusal that is not no, but a redirection towards futures. Otherwise, they don't rely on black and native genocide. King 2017 refusal reflects on King's experience of traditional refusal. Practice the economic the people economic has refused the authority of the state. Almost every turn refusal and every day encounters to announce this who are there are by race moves of refusal production and productive and necessary refusal. Not subtracted generative refusal is not just another redirection. The idea is acknowledged and question refusal itself can be developed and the method and the regenerative practice of refusal. The colonial abolition churches make no Western thoughts black opponents of the colonial knowledge is supposed to universal liberal neutral knowledge without horizon versus erasure enacted by European colonial theory that we need to consider those on the backside through the blood of theory developed the way and circulated while hiding its own violence. The perm. No perms in a method versus methods of a few key reasons, but first, predictability disad. And this is a new link. The king evidence says that whiteness always tries to confine fugitivity and the loophole retreat, which proves that I was always trying to seek to predict the movements of the loophole retreat, which is the same logic that how white supremacy always seeks to hyper-visibilize trans people, which serves the case and the reason why the permutation is mutually exclusive because the loophole retreat should always be unpredictable, which is how, but Iowa has tried to make it predictable, which is how black poor people always get exposed by white supremacy, which is a performative dissent to the app. Now this is a question of research which is tied to the material consequences of the app. Now KVK debates treat the entire what it sees plastics, anything else, lost and pick and choose which parts other advocacy matter in unpredictable ways. This debate should be about competing methods of the perm gives and not be able to manage that. It makes it impossible to be negative to rep testing and testing is key to figure out best resistance of perm denies us having a robust conversation about different methods of organization when we get individually combine methods and genesis theoretical nuance of our theory that it may source advocates and individually rest of debates reseverance and links or severance all specific link arguments or distance to the perm and proves they can't genesis their methodology, which means we are impact turning it and makes me positive and negative impossible by ignoring our criticism of them for AFCON decay and generates competition by being anti-theoretical to the one you see the permutation justifies AFCON by allowing the to obliterate the link debate and justifying infinite spikes out of crucial and offense putting us infinitely behind five critical impact turns are good, no perms incentivize critical impact turn debates, i.e. abolition good versus abolition bad, hope good versus bad, etc. The one AR will say that those debates are violent, which is false. Impact turns are the crux of good. And KVK debates and that benefit is nuanced debates, which was above sex critical clash. No perms and KVK debate incentivize critical clash that produces epistemological growth that is key. That's creating revolutionary activist scholarship by creating in-depth education. The perm destroys it by letting the app no link of the perm and the K because there's no direct refutation between theories of power. 7 perms fighting their model. The way to incentivize the perms fighting that's bad because the 2C has to be the mechanism with them nuance, which was the block and 2 and are infinitely behind makes ruins revolutionary clash, which is above 8 infinite perm solves all our offense. You don't need a permutation if you're winning the link turn or impact turn debate. Now I can't do both. The K is an impact turn that was above 10. There's no net benefit. The all resolves the entirety of the case. Perms have to be net benefit or they're legitimate. And if we want to link, you should cross the line here. Proves they should get a permutation. Every standing unit is a voting issue and a reason to reject the team. Case. I'm gonna do the unending story turn here. Cross 6 was absolutely terrible and embarrassing. The 2AC is binding. They said unending stories are good, which causes form of spectacularization because both of us and IO agree that nothing ends the world after this round, which means they simply create new forms of photoshopping that only access to view from somewhere that is white supremacy to just view the suffering black trans woman is a form of relationality, is a form of visibility that only makes the flesh of black trans women a form of sign and symbol for Iowa's constant credit, which turns the case because it creates infinite forms of gratuitous infinite forms of subjecting to gratuitous violence that should be framed through libidinal drives because white judges and white people in a could just be have felt attachment to the app that then constantly listening to the suffering of black trans women, which creates a presumption of valid because nobody would actualize the method of the 1AC. Now there's also a pro optimism impact. Nothing about the 1AC solves. Nothing about the 1AC solves. Think about this like a revolutionary fiat K because nothing about the 1AC actually solves, which means that they continue to be an unending story that only uses black trans women as pieces on a chessboard to always advocate for a world that never comes, which leads to white resentment for Iowa when the end of the world never comes into debate, which means that it always results in white supremacist backlash against black trans women who do not want to be with Iowa and the coalitions to end the world, which is all black trans women get criminalized in the status quo. Now they cannot say that they do not force the labor because nice try. Yes, you do because they defend black trans coalitions, which means that obviously they force them to labor forever, i.e. the ways in which they say that unending stories are good. That is the ways in which the 1AC could just constantly read the labor and take credit of black trans women for trying to labor forever. But obviously it proves that they made arguments about why we can't solve, proves that they recreate racist double standards to burden black debaters with more exhaustion to prove their own arguments because nobody solves anything in this fucking debate, which means that the all solves uniqueness links, whatever the framework interpretation is just some Emory bullshit that should obviously be stricken off your flow. Now they said unending stories good. That's a double turn with their Larson evidence because it says black trans women in specific circulate as raw material for the generation and ascendancy of respectable transgender subjugation symbiotic with the death making techniques of the United States Empire. That is the example of how Iowa can just use black trans women as symbols for the ballot, but also symbols for their own success within debate, but also for their own politics to potentially export outside. Even though we obviously know they're not going to we obviously know that they're not going to do those things. Now, the empathetic identification decided we're obviously winning the symbolic eligibility decided. Iowa simply engages in ballot accumulation where they use black trans identity without ever giving them material or pride at all through the reading of the 1AC, which creates pro-optimism, means you can vote negative on presumption. It creates a form of iconography that always is parasitic because white people can talk about black people without ever aiding in their liberation, because nothing about giving Iowa the ballot helps black trans femmes, no less any of the black trans femme women they have listed out in the 1AC, which means that they simply result in a vacuum where people talk about violence and simply create a form of empathetic identification. Is the same example where trans communities use the example of Marsha P. Johnson, but obviously never fucking help black trans women in the first place, which means that the people they name and list in the 1AC are all reasons to vote negative because they don't aid in their actual liberation, which turns case on the level of epistemology because it only creates violent ways of knowing, which was above. And you can vote neg on presumption because when they say Iowa says we should think about this together, that's a double turn with their offense about black fungibility and white trans coalitions running in opposite lanes because the telos of the app inevitably requires them to be folded into such violence that always folds them back into humanism, where blackness would always inevitably seen it as other proven by the arguments above. And running as separate is a double turn with their 1AC evidence because they have claimed a we that is inflicted to universal desires and humanism that is inserted for their 1AC evidence in blue. Now, they gave examples of Oakland and the Caribbean. No, those are obviously answered by the arguments above that I made. They said that things are malleable. Obviously, that doesn't answer anything because you're anti-black, which means that you're not malleable in this instance. Now, they said that they end the world. What does that new world look like? These are questions that have to be answered. Otherwise, anti-blackness would probably be inevitable and still exist under the 1AC, which means that they solve nothing and only allow for more anti-blackness to exist in the world.
Okay, we had 750. Oh, I forgot to write it down. 756. What do you got?
I mean, I didn't write that. My recollection was 751.
That's what I'm talking. Cool.
Yeah, what were the reasons for reject?
One, I think, was the permutation. Secondly, the usage of the Cuban evidence as fungibility, because it does not talk about white trances, it talks about trances in the vacuum. We think that the King Epiphany subsumes, recognize that.
Probably got them.
Yeah, there's another one too. It's just like racist double standards to bring
Yeah.
like black debaters with more examples.
Yeah, that one.
To feel like the solvency.
Okay, those three.
No, we do not have everyone.
We do not have everybody. So how's your training going?
Oh, you know. We've actually had so many KVK debates at this tournament, which fucking rocks, except for the fact that, like, some people have to win them and some people have to lose them.
Michigan VP was our only framework debate all tournament.
I think we only had one.
Yeah, we would with BM.
Innovation.
Oh,
They finally found something else to say.
or did they?
Danny, I figured it out. Grand Central Market.
Oh, that's a hood classic.
That's what
Wait,
it
where's
is.
that? Is Dorian in here? Dude, you just hear that?
Bro, I'm about to get
Genuinely
flamed
said,
right now.
what is Grand Central Market?
I hate you, bro. Like, Orange County resident. Like,
That's what I'm saying.
I'm not even from LA. There's no reason I should know more about
That's why I was
Grand
asking. You're like 15 minutes away from LA. And you don't know what Grand Central Market is? We're gonna take you after this tournament, don't worry.
All I'm saying is I'm from Chicago and I know what it is.
That's Ray's waxing me, dude.
I can't even say nothing. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm assuming there's no cards.
Oh, there's a card, I'm sorry.
Okay, here.
That's my debate, KVK debates, so I read one of our cards. I'm trying it out. Yeah. I got
Yeah, one era starts with a lot of definitions.
it. I just count
Like read the counter definitions in the one, yeah.
Oh.
I haven't got it just yet. Can I throw this in a document or something?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Can I see if I can turn these lights on some more?
Yeah.
I feel like it's dim in here.
Yeah. It's giving like a weird mood. I don't know. Oh, you got it.
Oh, so close. Yeah.
That's so much better.
Whew. Feel awake, okay. Okay. I see 5 judges. The order, you know, okay, so it's a case, and then the critique. I'll start with the perm at the top. So like the 1 and R first, and then the 2 and C. Actually, that's pretty clear. That was a good order. Okay.
But you said perm first.
You said what?
Was there like a doc or something?
Yeah, I just sent an email, or like the card in the body of the email.
Also, just make sure I don't miss anything. I'm just gonna like sit right here.
That's it. Anyone not ready?
Yeah, my brain is not here. What wants to say? You heard the paper.
Sorry, case, and then the K in the order of 1 and R, 2 and C.
Vote affirmative to endorse transversality as an operation that reorients our desires to the end of the world, returning to the entanglements of ecology, energy, trans-antagonism, anti-blackness as the fascist effect of metabolism of the world, consolidates hierarchies of political matter, that overrepresent Western man as human. Transversality explodes that grammar, which is Bruce, which link turns every theory of power claim they have. Polarization is a theory of desire and subject formation that impact turns their claims about ontology and libidinal economy, because Long Beach's pessimism is too pessimistic. When I see Raha says the transversality links our struggles below the surface and anti-colonial rewiring of the senses, which solves libidinal economy and refuses the alignment desire to possess. 2 impacts. 1, polarization, their theory and that the libidinal economy sees desire to anti-blackness and dissolves white obligations to the end of this world, which reproduces trans-antagonism because it sees political grammars, the fascist effect of metabolism. 2, crisis logic's emergence is named as emergency to justify ecological destruction, organized abandonment, trans-antagonism, which are fundamentally linked, which turns all of their arguments about equivocation, because only transversality can create a rupture in history and reorient our obligations to each other and our desires toward the end of the world. Tracy, 1 NR1 is an unending story. Link, question mark, what the fuck? Our argument is that we have fundamentally turned this because they have assumed that anytime we invoke black trans women, that in and of itself must assume them suffering, which Link turns all of the top level stuff on that they did on case. Most of the panel is not white, but for the people who are not, black, they should not presume they should not presume the the philia arguments, because those because transversality offers a way to solve that. Their arguments about no black trans women are here is kind of fucking weird when one such person is on the panel, which is a reason to reject the team, but they say we have representation suffering. No, that's linked to the critique. Their arguments about critiquing credit for black trans women's labor is, if this argument is true, then it is also a link to them insofar as they have made the argument the alternative selves case, but they've also said we burden black debaters with labor, but burdening cis black debaters with the labor of thinking about trans antagonism is fucking good, actually. The empathetic identification / valid arguments, this is not our, the empathetic identification arguments are all answered above. Now presumption, we are the ones collective link turns all of their arguments about violence and putting black people on the front lines, because it's a collective in Oakland that emerges out of practice of transversality and arms the girls, puts white people on the front lines. The Glissant example implicates their argument about the King evidence, because he used Deleuze's theory in order to articulate decolonial international, which link turns everything that they have said. The pornotroping, fundamentally no fucking link. There is no bright line, which was set up in the Tuesday and conceded. Okay. The threshold for voting on the alternative is that it solves the links, but they cannot, which is our argument about every single double turn that we have extended. It can nor can solve its theory of power, because it's simply an academic project that we will win as trans-antagonistic. It also links to itself, which I will do below. But our red voices decide, which I will do below, outweighs the permutation solves link and that decide, because it does the alternative without a trans-antagonistic theorization of blackness as existing prior to gender. Now the permutation debate proper. We get the permutation because they conceded that every single word of the phone was a reason why I should prioritize comparison between the and the alt. Anything else atomizes knowledge, short change process, revolutionary comparison, turns clash by tracking the need of solvency, which moves the 1AC that answers all of their arguments. Predictability decide is wrong, because the loophole of retreat is fundamentally a fucking affirmative argument, which is why Snorton, who thinks along the lines of transversality, or articulates transversality as a praxis in and through thinking about the loophole of retreat, the no perms method debate is wrong, because it falsely brackets what our methods debate. Literally every single other argument was about testing and clash, which is a reason why I should prioritize comparison. There is a net benefit, which will be the decide. I will do the decide here. None of those are reason to direct the team. I'll do the decide here. Their conception of fungibility and ungenerating produces and disavows a hidden figure of black trans, which means that the alternative inevitableizes anti-blackness. I will make this extraordinarily clear every single time the 2 and C and 1 and C cross-sex say that blackness exists prior to gender is a link to this piece of evidence, because King is internally citing Spillers, who we read an entire fucking card to answer, and they blew off. You should hold the line on you to enter answers, because they have fucking lost the debate. Theories about gender are implicitly built for cis audiences, because they reified the naturalness of a colonial category of social gender, i.e. to say that black women were ungendered presumes a prior colonial capture of bodies through gender, which maps backwards onto time a gender binary that is colonial, which internally turns the K, because even social theories of gender apply a deeply colonial mode of thought, which is trans-misogyny, decide to their interpretation. And the alternative, Red Voice 22, trans-misogyny is anti-blackness, despite man's biomythology, sexual downward relations, sexism, pro-slavery with trans-misogyny as the fulcrum, which is the reason why they should lose lose the fucking debate, which was the reason why they should lose the debate for having conceded that, and also it answers their theory of power, which is by and large done on Case. Now, the link debate, the crimes evidence is that white people, what trans people are on the front lines. I linked her in this on Case with the We Are the Ones example, which means that they produce a worse because they put trans people into, but they put black trans people into proximity with black cis people who will reproduce violence proven by their performance in this debate. The second link is the coherency. It's a coherency. We force things onto black trans women. That is absolutely not true. Where has the 1AC done this? The only person who was mentioned by name was Laverne Cox in the 1AC, and I swear to fucking God, we will read a two-A card, two-A card that says Laverne Cox thinks that the magazine cover that she was on was fucked up and said we should talk about it in educational fucking spaces. We will read the card if you go for it. Third is the Bruno link spectacular action. The alternative is not when they say quote the alternative is lines of play, that is linked to King, but the Bruno evidence was linked to above. Now the King evidence, they have made okay, we have read a rehighlighting of King who has made no criticism of transversality despite writing anti-delusion articles, which is why this is the most proximate piece of evidence you should use to think about